Uh, Thanks, Wendy. We've got an action-packed agenda today, so we're just going to get started. Thanks for being here. Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you for the roll call.
Great. Nancy Hendrickson, I have not seen her on yet. She is planning on attending. Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma.
Here.
John Niyama indicated he is on vacation. Shirley Craddock.
Present.
Lori Stegman, I believe, is not able to make it. Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid, I've not seen.
Here, I'm here,
You're here. Awesome.
but you're not seeing me. There.
That's fine. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander. No Eric yet. Janelle Bell. Ed Washington. Bob Salinger is expected, and Nancy Hendrickson. I saw you joining.
Yeah, I'm here.
So the records show we're only at 8 right now. 1, 2, 3. At 9, we need Bob to join us, and then we'll be able to vote on the bylaws.
So we will.
I just let him in from the waiting room, so.
Oh, awesome.
Excellent. We'll just give it a minute here and we won't have to reorder the agenda, although we can move to our first order of business, which is approval of the consent agenda. And the consent agenda includes our July 6th minutes, our July 18th minutes, August 3rd minutes, and August 15th minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'd like to make note that I received a few edits that I sent out today.
So we are approving the edited version of those minutes that were sent out by Wendy today. Just for clarification, do I have a motion? Or I'm sorry, any, yeah, we'll take motions first and then talk about any.
This is Shirley Craddock. I move to approve the consent agenda as edited.
Okay, we have a
Okay.
motion from Shirley Craddock. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Shirley Craddock, second by Eric Molander. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye or yes.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Wendy, is Bob on now? Do we have 10 board members?
Yes.
Okay. So we are going to move on now, and I'll pass it over to Hong to talk about our meeting schedule bylaws amendments and the meeting schedule resolution that we are going to propose today. Hong?
All right, pretty exciting stuff. Thanks for having me again. This is a second time this issue has come before the board, and certainly this time we have the sufficient number of board members present to possibly pass this change. This is a proposal to change bylaws with respect to scheduling the board meetings on a routine basis. Right now, the bylaws allow for us to, I think originally it was written for every first Monday or third Monday of the month. That is not working out for a number of board members, and we are at a critical point where we need the broad number of people attending. So this proposal is is changing, there are two proposals, there are two resolutions. One is to allow for the board to make changes to the schedule, subject to resolution. And then the other change is an actual resolution to establish the regular meeting as, I believe, remind me, Wendy, the third Tuesday,
The third Thursday.
third Thursday of every month. So with that, so there are two resolutions, 2022-0901 and -02. Any questions for me? Okay. With that, if there are no questions, I just want to note that if you do approve this, know that for the -02, we will be changing and correcting a spelling error in the title. The word schedule needs to just be have a C in there. So that would be the amended resolution change. Any other questions? Comments? All right, well, let's get this party on the road then. Wendy, may I ask that you call for a roll call vote, ensuring that we have at least 10 members present and all 10 members passing?
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve resolution 2022-0901, a resolution adopting amendment number 2 to the bylaws of the district.
Thank you, Eric. So we have a motion by Eric Mueller. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Eric, Nancy beat you to that one. I saw her hand go up quickly, so we're gonna say Nancy Hendrickson has seconded the motion by Eric. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Don't be shy. I'm not seeing anything, no. So Wendy, can we do a roll call vote?
Yes, Nancy Hendrickson,
And it actually worked.
Nancy, you were on mute.
Did on my rain pants and that REI raincoat, and like when I would just hold it under the sink,
oh,
the water would just sort of like.
I'm gonna ask everyone to please mute when you're not needing to speak.
So did you get me?
Nancy Hendrickson,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Aye.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
and was Lori Segman able to join us? Not yet. Corky Collier,
Aye.
James Allison,
Aye.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Annie Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Aye.
Bob Salinger,
Yes.
of 11 yeses, the motion passes.
Excellent.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of resolution 2022-0902, a resolution approving a schedule of regular meetings.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion by Eric Mueller. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Tanny Stephenson. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Wendy, let's take another roll call.
Nancy Hendrickson,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Aye.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
Corky Collier,
Aye.
James Allison,
Aye.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Tanny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Aye.
Rob Salinger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Nancy, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, it just occurred to me. How many, if we want to change it again to a different day, like maybe a year from now, not really soon, do we still, how many people do we need to approve it?
It'll be by resolution, so it'll just, we won't need the 2/3.
Full majority.
So it's more efficient.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Next up, I wanted to have a bit of an informal discussion about our meeting venues. Last month, we had an in-person meeting that was also available for those that wanted to join online, so a hybrid. Wondering kind of what the opinion of folks here is about whether we should be continuing that format in the future, whether for the business meeting of the month or the work session or both. And I just wanted to do a straw poll to try to gauge the room. So the way we're going to structure this, I guess I just want to open it up first to kind of some comments, questions, and then we'll take our straw poll after a few minutes of discussion. Does anybody have a strong opinion either way, or want to express their opinion of the pros or cons of either of those approaches? Having either just continue all online like we are now, virtual meeting, or having a hybrid, either one of the meetings or both of the meetings. So raise your hand. I see Dave's hand up. Dave, go ahead.
We just had a, at our last city council meeting, and I suppose the rest of the, at least elected officials probably had the same thing. There's some, there was some directive from the state that meetings should be hybrid, should be both. There, people can attend via Zoom or in person. That's probably for public comment, but anyway, that might govern what we do here. I'm not sure. My preference, I'll just state, is to do, I would probably usually attend a Zoom meeting. Having once in a while being able to attend an in-person meeting is great. So I guess I favor hybrid.
Thanks, Dave. Mary Helen.
I agree with Dave about hybrid meetings, but just because of my health conditions and my doctor's recommendations and the challenges that are out there with the booster shots and effectiveness, I've been advised not to get in a room with anyone that I can't verify their level of contamination. So I wouldn't be able to attend an in-person one. Zoom calls are more convenient for me and my health condition. And I wanted to point out, and I think I saw Ken Anderson on the call, they did a very good hybrid meeting. I know it was labor intensive for Jason and other people in the room, but you were able to see the people when they spoke and hear the people, but staff had to kind of run around with the microphones and the laptops so that pictures could show, but that's my opinion.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Eric Molander.
Hybrid meeting will be more convenient for many of the people that have very tight schedules. So eliminating the need to drive to MCDD would really enhance the attendance at our meetings. I do still feel that the in-person meeting led to really very important understanding of people's positions, and I intend to go to meetings in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Wendy and then Nancy.
Just wanted to clarify Dave's question or point about the new state law. So when we have in-person meetings, we need to also have an online component. That doesn't require us to have a hybrid. We can have solely online meetings as well.
Thanks for the clarification, Wendy. Nancy,
Yeah, I really appreciate in-person meetings. On the other hand, I don't want to meet inside with anyone, like you guys, but I want to be outside, even if that means I wear a coat. And so we always have a hybrid option. That's great. I also hear that I also have a tight schedule some days, and having the online option just means I can come. So I would really hope that we could do some in-person outside, I don't know, things to be able to talk to each other and get to know each other and build our relationships, as well as the online version for business.
so potentially some optional kind of mixers, outdoor social events to get to know each other, or meetings outdoors is what I'm hearing.
Yes, it's hard to like add some social stuff on top of the meeting. So, you know, with that one where we had lunch and then a meeting, I thought that was a nice way to
Yeah.
get meets.
Thanks, Nancy. Bob, we can't hear you, Bob. It doesn't show you on mute, but we can't hear you right now. I think Bob's jumping off and back on to see if it'll fix his audio issue. Shirley?
I just want to say thank you for the comments regarding the hybrid. I agree with comments made about allowing, it creates flexibility. And I, as most people know, I'm leaving the Metro Council at the end of this year, so this isn't really, I don't really account in this at this moment, but I just know there's some days you can attend an in-person meeting, and some days that it would be easier to attend an online meeting. And so having both options would be really helpful. It would be just one added request though, and I recognize it adds an extra financial burden, but to make sure the technology is adequate to really make the hybrid meeting valuable and helpful. I've attended a few hybrid meetings where some people are in the room and others aren't. And it's really difficult to hear, to get good sound and to see who's talking. And so I recognize that technology is going to be really important to make these meetings to be really successful. And so everyone can participate. So I want to add that extra little addition to this discussion.
Thank you, Shirley. I attended the hybrid meeting in person, so I didn't experience what it was like from the virtual standpoint. So maybe hearing from somebody kind of what deficiencies were there in that meeting to see where we can fill some technology gaps would be good. Corky?
I just want to say I'm all for the hybrid option. It's nice to meet in person if we can, but mainly I just wanted to point out, thanks to MCD staff for setting up a hybrid conference room before the pandemic. I guess they could see the future.
Thanks, Corky. I'll second that, and James did as well. I didn't hear anything from anybody about a preference for it just being a hybrid option for example, the work session or the business meeting. It sounds like folks kind of prefer maybe the same format for both of those meetings. Any opinions there? Okay, not seeing any. Bob, you're back. Did you want to talk about your preference?
Sorry, I got lost in reception. Yeah, I support what most people said. I support a hybrid. I really like in-person meetings, but I also respect the challenges of folks are facing as well. So hybrid would be great.
Thanks, Bob. Lori?
Thanks, Steve. I attended the in-person meeting and I agree with everyone, but I did like the idea of maybe on a quarterly basis or a couple of times a year, where we could make an effort to meet in person. And I realize that there are challenges for some, but having the hybrid is really good. But I thought it was really important. I mean, it was great. I got to visit with some folks in person, and it's just a different experience. And I think, giving, that opportunity to those who can travel on occasion, I think it would benefit the group, at least maybe a couple of times a year.
Thank you. Boy, we got through just about everybody there. I don't know that we need a straw poll at this point. It feels like a lot of folks have said the same thing, that they like the flexibility of a hybrid meeting. They like the benefits of being in person when that's available. So I think we're going to look to see what technology gaps we might have to make sure that the user experience on the virtual end is as strong as it can be, and giving everybody an equitable meeting experience, and then look to schedule more hybrid meetings in the future. So thank you for that.
Could I just make a comment? Because I kind of made it slight, but I think it's important. And I'm going to put Ken Anderton on the spot on this one. Have him maybe put you in touch with Jason Community Affairs of how they set up the room, because it worked really, really well for me being at home, because I could see the people, hear the people. And it just took them, I mean, literally running around the room with a couple, not running, but walking quickly around the room to put the laptop, or they had multiple laptops focused, but if they needed it, they slid it in front of the people. So it wasn't much different than what we see now. It just took up a few more seconds to get it set up that way.
Thank you, Mary Helen. I know we do, just at City of Gresham, we do have several conference rooms set up for hybrid meetings, and it is a pretty seamless experience. I don't know, I'm not a technology person, so I don't know exactly what microphones or what we're using on the camera front, but we have it dialed in pretty well. So I think between the agencies, we can learn from each other and see what can be done to make sure if there are any gaps with the MCDD conference room, that we get those filled. Any questions from staff of the group? Wendy, anything on your end?
No, the staff has it pretty well dialed in, and we will reach out to those other organizations for other suggestions.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. We have a few appointments to the board, so exciting times for some new faces. And the first potential appointment that we have is Ken Anderton for the Port of Portland. Wendy?
I don't have anything really to add. On the 14th, that appointment was approved, and I apologize, I can't remember if I emailed that out to everyone, but I do have that that confirmation that the Port Board approved Ken as a replacement to Ann Gravitt to represent the Port.
Excellent, excellent. So when we appoint new members, this is just the same process that we go through to approve an agenda item. Do we have a motion from anybody to approve the appointment of Ken Anderton to represent the Port on this board?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I move to appoint Ken Anderton to the seat on the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board.
Thank you, Tanny. We have a motion by Tanny Staphenson. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
We have a motion by Tanny Staphenson, a second by Eric Molander. Thank you, Eric. Any discussion on the motion?
I just want to make a comment that I think it's a wonderful appointment, and Ken's following in, not in the shoes of, but Phil Ralston, who I saw was on this call, who once very poetically said, "I haven't been to a meeting I didn't like." So He was a meeting-aholic, and so I think that this is a wonderful appointment.
Thank you, Mary Helen. I'm not quite sure what to say after that. I'll second that. I believe Ken is extremely well suited to be on this board. So we have a motion, we have a second, we had discussion. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, do we need to take a roll call on this, Wendy?
Yes, the board can choose to do a voice vote, but I'm happy to move forward with a roll call.
Yeah, you can do a voice vote.
I think
Steve.
let's do a voice vote on this one. I've got a feeling about it. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Welcome aboard, Ken.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Next up, we have another appointment to consider. This is the appointment of Heather King. And I believe this is filling the social justice seat. Is that correct, Wendy?
Environmental justice.
I'm sorry, environmental justice. Let's see.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve appointment of Heather King representing the Columbia Slough Watershed Council to the Environmental Justice seat on the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board.
Thank you,
second.
Eric. We have a motion by Eric Mueller. We have a second by Shirley Craddock. Thank you, Shirley. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, not seeing any. Nancy.
Sure, I'll just say that the Columbia Watershed Council has a long history with the slough and its levees next to the Columbia River, and haven't met Heather yet, but just knowing the organization, I'm sure that she'll bring a lot of value.
Bob?
Yeah, I think Heather's great. I know Heather and I've worked with Heather. I think she'd be a really super addition to the board. The only question, I also think she brings an environmental justice background. The only, and I support her. I support her joining. The only thing I just want to make sure we continue to think about, though, is I know when we created that seat, the thought really was going to be it was from one of the, specifically EJ focused organizations, and I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I know we've had a hard time recruiting, and again, I think Heather is a really, really good addition to the board. But I think also it also demonstrates perhaps that we continue to need to reach out to those culturally specific organizations as well to make sure we're recruiting there too. And I know we have been, but just want to flag that.
Thank you, Bob. Any further discussion on the motion?
I just wanted to add that Heather is on the call, and she was able to meet with Steve and Jim last week.
I had the pleasure of meeting Heather and having a discussion exactly last week. Thank you, Wendy. And I think just based on the meeting, the conversation, I feel like she would serve this board very well. And thanks for being here, Heather. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we're going to take a voice vote. All of those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, everybody. I'm excited to be on the board.
Excellent.
And I just wanted to clarify for the two new members that we'll get you to sign your oath of office, and then you will be able to vote.
Excellent. Thank you, Wendy. Next item on our agenda, we're going to move on now to the equity framework adoption. I'm going to turn it over to Evan for that presentation. Evan?
Hi there. Sorry about that. Having some technical difficulties on my end. Hi, Evan Mitchell, Public Affairs and Communications Manager. You have received the equity framework several different times with various iterations over the last 4 or 5 months. And we believe that we've integrated everybody's comments and feedback to date. And with that, we'd like to ask the board to consider adopting the equity framework. Obviously, if there's more feedback to consider, we will welcome that as well. I know that the Onaveros team is here. They've worked really closely with us on that. So I want to make sure Amber and Isabel, if you'd like to add anything, that you get a chance to do that.
Hi, everyone. This is Amber Ontiveros. If you have any questions or need clarification concerning the suggestions that you all made, Ms. Isabel is here to, talk you through the changes that we've made based on your direction and input.
Shirley.
Thank you very much. I think the comments I'm going to make won't affect the framework. I think the framework is moving forward very well. And I think these comments, I think these are the comments I'm going to make really will be more about how staff move ahead in fulfilling this framework. And so my comments are specifically around working with the tribes. Annalisa Kohler, with Metro's Government Affairs Department, asked Katie to help us with this, Katie McDonald, who's Metro's Tribal Affairs Liaison and works in the Government Affairs Department, to review the framework. And I think Katie really gave some good feedback that I'd like to pass on to this group. And again, these comments I don't believe need to change the framework, but I think it does. We do need to think about how we work with the tribes in the future. So first of all, to think about the tribes are sovereign nations. And so when you work with a tribe, you work with them as if they are just another government entity. And so you work with them like you work with the city of Gresham, like you would work with the city of Fairview, Troutdale Wood Village, of course, Multnomah County, Metro. Each tribe is their own sovereign nation and a relationship should be developed with each tribe. In addition to that, tribes, I like the way Katie phrased this, tribes should be engaged first, early and often. They were here first. They have very close ties. The Columbia River extremely important to them, and the health of the river and the bounty that comes from the river. And so it's not just the tribes also that are in the Portland area specifically, but the tribes along the entire Columbia River. And that I know that Metro works with both the Umatilla and with the Yakima. Another suggestion was made is that we need to include all the tribes. And so the other tribes to think about are the Grand Ronde, the Silex, the Cowlitz. And so they should all be included. And so working with the tribes isn't just one committee. Again, it's working with an entire city and working with that agency to, as you develop the work that you're doing. And particularly with thinking about the impact this levee system has on the Columbia River watershed, and in particular then with the also think about the tribal members that were actually part of Vanport, that actually lived in the area and were affected by the Vanport flood. So I know Katie would likely make herself available if staff wanted to ask more questions about this. As I looked at the framework, I don't think any changes need to be made, but I just want to pass on this kind of information on how important it is that we respect the tribes. They're a sovereign nation. There's not just one or two people, it's a whole nation of people that we should be working with. And there are many tribes, and each tribe has different needs and different ways that you work with them, and we need to take this into consideration. So I'll just want to throw that out and let you ponder that as we move ahead with this discussion today. So thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Mary Helen?
I want to second everything that Shirley said, and much more eloquently than I would have said. In working with the Vanport Place Marking Project, we've had dealings with tribes and their lives and history and heritage and resources that are on the Vanport site. And I think we need to consider that throughout the district, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. And like any government agencies, we need to involve them. And they often, in speaking with the Confluence Project and Willamette Falls Trust and people that represent tribes, the city has a Native American Community Affairs Council that meets once a month. And so they have representatives invited from all the tribes. And I think being in contact with them and their Ken Rumbaugh at the city of Portland would be the city contact for that meeting. They would have information in contacts, and that's how I was able to make contacts with them so that we can. But with any entity, it's difficult because people are asked to do many things and they have to evaluate their times. And it was, Shirley, I had written down Katie's name wrong. I had Katie something, and I didn't have the, I think you said McDonald part, but she was instrumental maybe 2 years or a year ago in trying to get in contact and make those contacts, because everybody has, like you said, has different opinions and different approaches and different beliefs. And they didn't record their history like we did in writing and photographs. And so there's a challenge there in representation and how they go about their representation. But I think that they definitely need to be included in our language and our mission to provide equity. And I've said that about disabilities, but I think I neglected to say anything about tribes, but they're a very important part of the history of this region. And I hope that they are considered to participate. When we had a vacancy and we were recruiting, I contacted several different tribal leaders from Grand Ronde, Yakima, Umatilla, Chinook, and the response is pretty much, we're really busy, but we'll see what we can do. So I think that will be the challenge, but we at least have to be able to document that we asked and tried and wanted to include them.
Thank you, Mary Helen. Other comments, questions? Eric?
Yeah, Steve, I just want to clarify a couple of things that are in our goals. And specifically in goal number 2, commits time and resources to expand more diverse leadership within our board staff and advisory body. My understanding is that what is excluded from that is supporting candidates that are elected by the public. So we're not being a political action committee. Is that correct?
As a government entity, we cannot do that, Eric. You as board members can do whatever you please, but no, the staff will not engage in that.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? I know that what Councilor Craddock and Mary Helen brought up may raise questions, and I believe maybe indirectly the current equity framework does talk about including the tribes, but I wonder if it needs to be made more explicit. Councilor Craddock, you said you're not suggesting that additional changes be made to the framework as provided, but maybe before we go there, I saw Eric's hand up and then Corky. Eric?
Yeah, so what we have in front of us is a very broad framework, and it includes principles that are very near and dear to my heart. But the critical next stage of that is when we start to define what is really in scope for us to act upon and how we're going to fund it. So, this by no means that our work is done. In fact, the more important part of it is now with these guiding principles that we can all agree to, we now need to set priorities and the scope that we would have for them. Thank you.
Well stated, Eric. Thank you. Corky?
On section 3.2, please somebody tell me to be quiet, it doesn't matter. On the very last sentence before that addition of all areas of operation, I think the word in was meant to be there.
Corky, thank you for catching that typo. Evan, we can follow up with a revised version that fixes that. And any other changes that might need to be made regarding any minor, spelling issues. Hopefully that is small enough that we can move forward with any decisions with the understanding that that can be adjusted.
Well, and just to provide a reminder for folks, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear at the outset, since this is a work session and not a board meeting, we'll need to reserve the motion for the next meeting.
Thank you, Evan.
So
Evan,
that'll give us an opportunity to change any.
Evan, that's actually, we do have a resolution and this is a regular meeting. So.
Oh my goodness, I missed never mind. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong seat of the month. Too many board meetings.
We have 7 this month.
So you can't, sorry about that. You can make a motion, but we will fix the small typo.
This is Amber. I just wanted to follow up on Councilor Craddock's comments. I deeply appreciate the comment, and to board member Eric, we are actually in the process of beginning to develop the equity action plan, which is essentially the very thing that Eric pointed out, which is it's essentially developing this next steps. Once you approve the framework is essentially the policy framework for what you then do in action. And so we'll be working with the staff to develop the equity action plan, in which case we'll take Councilor Craddock's comments and incorporate that in the way that y'all engage the tribes. So that can be part of the framework and the next steps as part of its analysis. So thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Any other comments, questions? Tanny?
Yeah. Do we have any estimates of what we think this will cost to implement, like on an annual basis?
Yes and no. So, we are working through cost estimates at a staff level. And so it's a very good question, Tanny. I think currently we are all we're spending on sort of our equity programming is our consulting cost to have audit bureaus support us. That will continue until we have an operating revenue structure stood up. At which point that's going to be part of the discussion that we have once you have the scenarios in front of you. So I don't even want to hazard a guess because I don't know where that is right now, but that will be a part of what we discuss when all the scenarios come forward, and you'll have that for each of the program areas.
Councilor Craddock.
Well, I just want to say thank you to the staff and the board. I know this has taken a while. We've had multiple meetings about this and multiple trainings / experiences. And so I think it's really turning into a really wonderful document, and want to congratulate you. I know it's been a lot of work, particularly for the staff. So thank you very much for all that you've put into this and your research. And this framework will improve over time. We'll learn from it and add to it as we move on and or as this agency moves on. And so I think this is a really good start. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Nancy.
On that note, I will echo what Councilor Craddock says, that this is a really great framework. And do we have as a bit of guidance for the actual board when it gets set up, how often they should probably look at it? Annually, every other 2 years for a while. It should be a way to, we should build in a way to improve it as we learn more about our effectiveness. But I don't know how to do that unless you say, like, at the end of the document, it should be looked at in 2 years.
Thank you, Nancy. Eric.
Yes, I was just going to say, I believe that revisiting it periodically is going to be part of what comes out of the action planning, because as they do the various action plans, I think they'll come up with an implementation process for a certain section, and there'll be 7 steps or 7 bullet points, and it'll turn out that, you know, number 4 just doesn't work, that they're going to have to revise that. And so I think that's where the staff is going to be providing you know, feedback back to the board saying, you know, we've implemented steps A through whatever, and, you know, these have been successful and these we want to revise, and they're going to, of course, have to incorporate that in the annual budget proposal. You know, they want to implement another section of it or another set of initiatives. You know, there'll be, I believe, interaction that will kind of require it to be revisited. Although I think it's going to be more so the action plans rather than what was pointed out before, that this is kind of a higher level policy umbrella, and the action plans are the stuff that change periodically.
Thank you, Eric. If somebody is considering making a motion, you can find recommended language on page 32 of the packet. This would be resolution 2022-09-03, adopting an equity framework for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District.
Mr. President, if I may just add, if there is a strong desire, you can add, amend the resolution to have the executive director report back on a yearly basis or quarterly basis.
Thank you, Hong. Eric.
Mr. Chair, I would move adoption of resolution 2022-09-03, adopting an equity framework.
I'll
Thank you, Eric.
second.
So we have a motion by Eric Mueller, a second by Shirley Craddock. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, let's take a roll call vote. Wendy?
Nancy Hendrickson,
Yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Aye.
Dave Ripma,
Yes.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
Lori Stegman,
Aye.
Corky Collier,
Aye.
James Allison,
Aye.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Penny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Bob Salinger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent. Thank you all. Any comments after the vote here? Eric, do you still have your hand up, or?
My apologies. I forgot to lower the hand. Sorry about
No
that.
problem. No problem. Well, congratulations. Thank you, staff and consulting team, for really putting together a stellar document that we can all get behind. And as folks have noted, the action plan is really where a lot of the rubber hits the road here, and definitely opportunity for revisions and updates down the road. We're gonna move on now to the cultural history presentation. I'm gonna ask Aster Moulton, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Thanks, Steve.
I take it away.
Hey, so hello, my name is Aster Moulton. I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Specialist with the Drainage District. I want to say I really appreciated just now the discussion on tribal engagement. One thing that you'll hear in our presentation is that we heard a lot of feedback from the community partners that we spoke to help inform these recommendations, that investing in resources and capacity for tribal engagement will be really important for cultural history. So that was a good segue. I am here presenting with several guests. We have our community engagement consultants, Cascadia Partners, with us. And I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. We also have 3 guest speakers here today. Mark Takaguchi with the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, Paul Lumley with the Native American Youth and Family Center, and Kim Moreland with Oregon Black Pioneers. We're gonna do presentation first, and then you'll get an opportunity to hear from our guest speakers later on, and I'll let them give a more formal introduction at that time. But with that, I wanted to give Kim and Irene and introduce, Kim and Lydia. Irene and Lydia, an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Irene Kim. I'm with Cascadia Partners, and we've been the consultants on this cultural history engagement process. And we're a small planning firm based in Portland, and yeah, it's great to see you all.
Great.
And I'm Lydia Ness. I'm an associate. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Lydia.
I was saying, I'm Lydia Ness. Thank you so much for having us today.
All right, Wendy, I think we're ready to move on to the presentation. Hi, welcome. One second, let me adjust my viewing options. So similar to what we've done with other program areas, we're going to go over what staff's current best thinking is for the types of cultural history programs that could be supported by the new district's revenue structure, and ultimately having a vision for what can be supported will ultimately inform the discussions around revenue that you all will be having over the next few months. And I want to start off by saying that I'm personally really excited about the recommended strategy that we're bringing you today. Per your direction, we did a lot of community engagement to help shape this strategy. And I think we've brought you some ideas that will focus staff capacity on flood safety while also investing in cultural histories in the managed floodplain that are already being implemented by community organizations and educational institutions. And we received a lot of support and excitement for this investment opportunity from the stakeholders that we spoke to. And I also wanted to mention that we did have an opportunity to talk briefly to James Harrison, who unfortunately passed away last week. And I just wanted to take a moment to honor his memory and legacy as a leader in equity and Black history. I know a number of you were close friends and colleagues with James, so thanks for taking a moment to honor his memory. And with that, Wendy, why don't you move on to the next slide? So similar to what we've done with other program areas, we're going to talk about where cultural history is referenced in ORS 550. We're going to talk about what the drainage districts do today regarding cultural history and any gaps. And then we're going to go over what our current best thinking is for how we can best invest in cultural history and meet that new mandate. And then I'm going to pass it off to Cascadia Partners. They're going to talk a little bit about the stakeholder engagement process that we've been doing over the past couple months. And they'll walk you through the key themes and the story map that they created that highlights those key themes. And hope you got a chance to see the story map beforehand. And if not, you'll get to see it today. And then they'll pass it back off to me. I'll talk about potential structures of what this cultural history investment can look like and hone in on the why. Why is this approach relevant? Why is it important? And then we'll pass it off to those guest speakers. And then finally, we'll end with a discussion. Next slide. So as we all know, we have new statutory requirements in ORS 550. This cultural history mandate is to provide the public with information regarding the cultural history of the territory of the managed floodplain. This cultural history is also referenced in the purpose statement. The purpose statement says this area represents significant cultural and community history of flooding, displacement, and loss, a history that should be remembered so it is not repeated. And our recommendations today are largely guided by this statutory language, as well as the equity and social justice mandate, which we are required to weave into all of our program areas. Next slide. So unlike most of the other topics that you've heard about so far, cultural history is not a core mission area of the drainage districts. So we've done limited work. There is a body of work that's been done on cultural research and resources by people like Dr. David Lewis and David Ellis, and that's really focused on ethnographic and historical research of the area. And we are also required by the National Environmental Policy Act and the National Historic Preservation Act to consider the impact we have on historic sites and cultural resources. And we conceptualize that body of work as informing our cultural history work, but distinct from it. And regarding cultural history, how we've been providing that information to the public thus far, it's primarily been through sponsorships and educational partnerships with organizations like the Native American Youth and Family Center, Vanport Place Marking Project, Vanport Mosaic, and we also share that cultural history information during our annual Bike the Levees event. Next slide. And because cultural history is a brand new mission area, right now the drainage districts have limited dedicated resources, limited strategic focus, and limited existing partnerships. Next slide. So our current best thinking for how we can implement cultural history and meet that new mandate is to build partnerships and implement program activities through those partnerships with communities that have cultural connection to the managed floodplain. This approach makes the most of staff capacity and focuses that capacity on flood safety mission areas, because ultimately you can reach a wider audience with fewer personnel by managing partnerships with other entities than through a staff-run program where we're the ones telling cultural history stories. And really it makes sense for communities that have cultural ties and intergenerational ties to the area to be sharing those stories. By developing these partnerships, we also have an opportunity to leverage them for flood awareness activities to once again reach a larger and more diverse audience and to tell that story of learning from past events that led to displacement and loss. And that story can really inform flood awareness activities today. And once again, the intent is to integrate the equity mandate into this program by prioritizing partnerships with communities that have been historically or displaced in relation to the managed floodplain. Next slide. Because the intent is to implement this program through partnerships, we reached out with community-based organizations and educational institutions that are already doing cultural history work in the managed floodplain to better understand the types of cultural history programs that already exist and the underfunded ideas that this revenue structure could potentially support. Next slide. So we created a story map that captures these key themes, and that was sent out to you ahead of time, and we'll walk through it now. Our community engagement consultants will walk you through that, and I will pass it off to Irene.
Great, thanks, Aster. So let me share my screen here before we get started. And I'm just getting over a cough, so if my voice isn't crystal clear, I apologize in advance. I'll try to be as clear as possible. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Maybe thumbs up. Okay, I see some head nods, great. All right, so again, my name is Irene Kim, and I'm very excited to be here with you all today and share the outcomes of our engagement over the past few months. So since August, Cascadia Partners and MCDD staff have been conducting one-on-one interviews with community organizations and stakeholders representing Indigenous and other BIPOC communities about the new district's cultural history mandate under ORS 550. Last week, we shared, as Esther mentioned, we shared this story map with you that summarized what we heard in this engagement process. And I'd like to just spend about the next couple of minutes highlighting some of the insights and ideas that we heard from stakeholders. But first, our goal for this, our real purpose for this engagement process was to, one, better understand the critical role that cultural history plays in our diverse communities within the managed floodplain. In other words, we wanted to know how do communities express their connection to this area today? And the second was to gather initial programming and investment ideas and needs that the new district could potentially support in order to achieve excellence in meeting the new district's cultural history mandate. And then also hear thoughts about the types of funding structures that would be most beneficial and have the most impact for the communities that these organizations serve. So who did we reach out to? We reached out to dozens of organizations serving the Portland region and interviewed 18 stakeholders from locally based, community-based and culturally specific organizations, environmental groups, and educators. And we asked, and there's also a list of the folks that we talked to and where they're located as well. And we also, we asked stakeholders 4 main questions during our interviews. So one was, what does cultural history mean to you and your community as it relates to your connection with the managed floodplain? What types of programs does the organization currently implement as it relates to cultural history? And third was, what would your vision be for a cultural history program that would most benefit the communities you serve? We also asked what types of funding structures would be most beneficial to nonprofit and community-based organizations that they would recommend as well. And so I just want to kind of go through some of the major key takeaways that we heard from these interviews. So one is that we heard very loud and clear that the new district should engage the tribes early and often to build relationships and transparency about the changes underway within the new district, and also opportunities to shape future programs. Second was that engagement, or is to engage children and youth in cultural history through educational programming to expose younger generations to the diverse history of the managed floodplain, including, but definitely, certainly not limited to the Vanport flood in 1948 and the effects that had on Black immigrant and low-income communities, Indigenous uses of the historic floodplain, and the history of immigrant farming in the floodplain as well. Similarly, programs that connect elders and youth to share their ancestries, stories, and traditional skills and ceremonies are really invaluable in keeping oral histories and traditions alive. We also know that the operating revenue will focus on programs, but we also wanted to share some ideas that we heard about capital investments like signage and artwork, recreational access, heritage centers, and harvesting opportunities that also play a major role in cultural history. Another key takeaway that we heard was for Indigenous stakeholders, cultural connection is to the managed floodplain is very closely related to the environment and natural areas. So in other words, it's very hard to separate cultural history from natural resources. They're really seen as the same thing. And finally, in regards to funding structure, we heard that organizations can have greater impact with more flexible and multi-year funding opportunities. So this allows more time to hire staff and build more capacity to do the work. So those were the kind of major key takeaways that we wanted to share up front, but I also wanted to just quickly go over some other key takeaways we heard from our questions. So the most powerful part of the interviews were the responses to what cultural history means to communities. Excuse me, if you haven't heard the the audio excerpts yet, I highly encourage you to listen to them. We've included audio excerpts from Lauda Laforte at Vanport Mosaic, Paul Lumley at Native American Youth and Family Center, who's here with us today, Teresa Montana at Wisdom of the Elders, Mark Takaguchi at Japanese American Museum of Oregon, who's also here today, and Kim Moreland at Oregon Black Pioneers, who's also here as well. And we also heard from Heather Gerko at the Confluence Project. So a key theme that we heard from many stakeholders is that cultural history goes beyond memorializing historical events through signage and interpretation, although that is very much an important part of telling the story. But investing in cultural history is also about creating spaces to reflect and heal from generational traumas caused by systemic and racial injustices that occurred on these sites, and create space for communities to tell their own stories in their own way. We learned that people and histories within the managed floodplain are incredibly expansive and intertwined. And we describe some of that history here and offer excerpts from stakeholders about why this history needs to be acknowledged. So you'll see as you go through audio clippings from our interviews. But that's not all. Communities from all walks of life continue to engage and connect with the managed floodplain today, both culturally, spiritually, and physically, through fishing and harvesting foods, educational opportunities, and through Indigenous ceremonies and sharing stories as well. So investing in cultural history can mean actively supporting cultural activities today. And I'll just add that we've really only scratched the surface through these conversations, and there's so much more to learn and discover through continued engagement. So in addition to that, I also wanted to share some of the existing programs that we learned as well. I won't go through all of these. There's a lot of programs that we learned about, but I'll just add that there are many programs and investments being made towards keeping cultural history alive in our region through classrooms, exhibitions, films, internship and mentorship opportunities, cultural events, canoe journeys, healing circles, arts, and more. So I'm just kind of scrolling through the ones that we were able to learn about through our interviews, but there's a lot more and a lot more organizations that we haven't talked to yet that I think we can learn a lot more from in terms of what they're doing around cultural history. And then finally, in addition to these existing programs that the new district could support, I wanted to highlight some of the underfunded ideas as well that could be supported within the managed floodplain. So we heard ideas about education and storytelling, memorializing history, and also greater access to the floodplain. So I won't go through all of them, but I just wanted to highlight a couple. Opportunities for interpretation and education at Broughton Beach and Whitaker Ponds Trail was something we heard, both popular destinations in our region. We also heard about helping connect immigrant and refugee communities to the water through educational opportunities, fishing, and safe access to the river and the floodplain. So we know that there's Slavic and Vietnamese communities that regularly fish along Columbia as well. There are several exciting prospects for future partnerships that are currently being planned. For instance, Portland school districts are currently working with some Indigenous stakeholders that we spoke to during this engagement around tribal history curriculum, which is now required by the state. So there's an opportunity for organizations to share their Indigenous history of the managed floodplain in a larger scale educational setting. Another idea that we heard is becoming a funding partner for a cultural history interpretation, a heritage center, educational programming to memorialize and honor the history of Vanport, Japanese American internment, Indigenous practices in the area, and more. So another exciting prospect that you may have heard of already is that Metro is currently seeking proposals for redevelopment at the Expo Center. That center's equity and community benefits for BIPOC communities. Hold on just a second. Okay. Also, investing in canoe access points to support indigenous ceremonies and connections to the river. Opportunities for indigenous first food harvesting and Japanese American farming to honor Japanese American growers before and after World War II. And also educational and cultural programs can also expose young people to jobs, careers, and flood safety and destruction and loss. So sorry. With that, I just wanted to conclude by saying that the folks we talked to are very excited about and really want to stay involved in the new changes happening in the new district and really support in creating a community-driven process for shaping future programs and investments related to cultural history. So we'd really like to express our thanks and gratitude to the organizations and stakeholders we spoke to for offering their time and wisdom with us. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll turn it back to Aster.
Thanks, Irene. Thank you so much for presenting, even with the sore throat. I wish I could give you my tea. But Wendy, why don't you go back to the slide deck, please? I just have a couple more slides to share with you before we move on to guest speakers. Next slide. So how could these investments be structured? We are thinking that, you know, there could be different categories of investments for the cultural history program. One thing we learned through talking to these organizations is that sometimes smaller investments of 5,000 to 10,000 can go a long way, and that could be implemented through a smaller grants program. And then for other organizations, they're really looking for larger and multi-year funding, anywhere in the range of 25,000 to even 100,000. So we would want another pool of money for those multi-year partnerships. And once again, with those partnerships, we have the opportunity to share not just about cultural history, but also flood awareness education. And we also heard the need for tribal nation engagement. So we'd want to invest in resources in that capacity as well, in terms of both personnel and consultant support. As a public agency, we have a variety of tools available for us to structure these partnerships, and those include grants, direct contracts, or we could implement this program through another foundation or another government agency, and they could implement it on our behalf. And there's also an opportunity to integrate equity by having some community-based oversight of the program. And once again, there was an emphasis on flexible funding structures, especially for smaller pots of money. Next slide. So honing in on the why is this approach important? Why is it relevant to the new district? We think this approach, once again, preserves staff capacity for flood safety. Instead of implementing these activities in-house, we would be contracting that work out and investing in partnerships, which makes the most of available public resources and is ultimately a more effective way of sharing information about the cultural history of the managed floodplain. And once again, this partnership model has a wider reach than staff outreach alone. We can educate a wider community about the cultural history of the managed floodplain and flood awareness opportunities. And this can also be an opportunity for community partners to really share their intergenerational story about displacement and loss related to the managed floodplain. And that's a really compelling way to inform people about flood risk today. A lot of people are unaware of the history of flooding, like the Vanport flood and other major floods that have happened in this area. And a lot of people are unaware that this area used to be a historic floodplain. And both of those tend to be core messages and when we talk about the levee system and that narrative. And once again, This approach invests in the work that is already happening by communities that are closest to the cultural history and have cultural ties to the area. And I think with that, Wendy, if you want to move on to the next slide, I can introduce our guest speakers. So once again, we have Paul Lemley, who is the Executive Director of the Native American Youth and Family Center, Kim Moreland, who's the Board President with the Oregon Black Pioneers, and Mark Takaguchi, who is the Interim Deputy Director of the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. I've asked each of these people to share with you just a few minutes about the type of cultural history work that their organization is implementing within the managed floodplain and potential underfunded ideas that could be supported by this revenue. We interviewed all of them as part of this process, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to hear directly from them rather than just through us and our summaries. So I think we can go out to gallery view and let our guest speakers say a few words. And I think I'll just pick on someone. Paul, would you like to go first? Introduce yourself and say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you again. I used to serve on this board. I think it was a little over a year ago I pulled off the board, but it's good to see everybody again. Once again, my name is Paul Lemley, and I'm a citizen of the Yakima Nation. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Native American Youth and Family Center. We are located on Columbia Boulevard next to the Columbia Slough. We have a 10-acre campus and a Native American high school called the Many Nations Academy. And we've been converting much of our open land on our property to a community wellness and food garden. It's pretty exciting to see all the changes at NAYA and drawing a closer connection to the slough. It's really a special place where we're located. I joined a little bit earlier, and it's right when you were starting to talk about, or we were finishing our conversation about talking about the tribe. So it sounds like you have an understanding of the tribes in this area who have treaties with the United States from the mid-1800s. Most of those treaties include the language that says we reserve the right to fish and hunt at all usual and accustomed places. So it's pretty clear that tribes have an interest in the area that we're talking about. I would like to talk a little bit about floods. First of all, floods are good and healthy for the environment. They help heal the landscape, they add nutrients to the soil, and floods help baby salmon get to the ocean fast. It's a part of the salmon's life cycle, and they depend on flooding. So educating the public about the benefits of the floods, I think, would be good. It's pretty clear, though, that there is a fear of floods, and that is born because people were allowed to move into the floodplain. So just adding a little bit more context to the Vanport flood, which was a horrible event, no question about it. But unfortunately, the United States and Canada used that event as a reason to build out the hydropower system even further and dislocated numerous tribal villages and further devastating salmon runs. So there is that part of the history as well. History and culture, I couldn't be happier with the direction you're heading with this kind of programming. And it was originally the reason why I wanted to join this board. So happy you're following through with it. Tribes and tribal organizations have a very strong interest in preserving cultural resources. There's no question about it. In the general area where NAYA is located, there was once a tribal fishing village called near Chokiku. So it's a very special place for NAYA to be where we're located, where there used to be a tribal fishing village. Being next to the slough is powerful for us. We feel like we have a responsibility to protect the slough and also to educate the public about the environment and our relationship as tribes and tribal people to earth and the water and the air. NAYA is particularly interested in a signage project to explain the physical environment and also in relationship to tribal culture and the history of the area. We're interested also in expanding our food garden to include traditional and medicinal plants, not only on campus, but also in the slough. So I just want to close by thanking you again for the opportunity to make a short presentation and to express the interest that the tribes and tribal organizations have to this area. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Paul. I think we'll reserve questions for after all of our guest speakers have talked. I imagine a lot of you wanna ask questions. And I think I will pass it off to Kim Moreland now. Kim, would you like to introduce yourself and Oregon Black Pioneers and their work?
Yes, and first I'd like to say hello to Mary Helen. And my name is Kimberly Moreland. I'm the chair of the Oregon Black Pioneers. I'm also on the Historic Landmark Commission and a member of the Architecture Heritage Center Board. And I'm so excited to be here today. I want to thank Astor, Irene, and Lydia for the conversation that we had. And it really kind of started to really open my eyes to the possibilities of having of benefiting from a cultural heritage investment. We are currently in the process of considering an Oregon Black Heritage Museum, and we're in conversations with the Expo Center in their redevelopment process and their RFP process. And as we began to, as I was talking to the ladies, I realized that this would be a great investment opportunity for your board. And not only that, as I listened to the presentation, I really was pleased that you want to integrate equity in your investment opportunity. And there's so many, hidden history related to African Americans and other BIPOC that's related to the Columbia River, both north and south of the Columbia River. And that began even before Oregon Territory was authorized. And so, along with, of course, the history, I think there's so many stories to be told that could be done in so many different formats, whether it's Afro Cultural Center, whether it's oral history program. It's just a wonderful opportunity to to target and to focus on the history of marginalized communities in Portland, Oregon, to have this wonderful relationship with the Columbia River. And also, as I explore even opportunities on the Willamette River, I found that there's some members of the Black community who are grieving that they lost access to the river. And I have a feeling it's probably the same. And as for the Columbia River as well. And so as we began to, explore these cultural heritage and resources, I want you guys to be mindful of, the communities that have this relationship with the river. And it'll be a great way to interpret that data, to engage new members, to provide opportunities to learn more about the levee system. Because I love being in new environments where it's a learning process for me, and really, there's so many wonderful things that can happen from investment in the cultural resources that create equitable opportunities. And I just want to finally say that I think that's it, just engaging with these communities and allowing them to decide what is best for them, what do they, how do they want to engage, and learning opportunities too, for us to understand, water management, flood management, and the importance of maintaining our levee system. So thank you again for this opportunity. I wish you the best of luck. Whatever you need from the Oregon Black Pioneers, please let us know, and we would love to support your effort.
Thanks, Kim. Mark, I will pass it off to you now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'm Mark Takaguchi. I'm the Interim Deputy Director, Japanese American Museum of Oregon. We are one of 4 Japanese American history museums in the entire country, really dedicated to telling 140 years of history of our people being here in the United States. So I'm going to go through a couple facts, and part of that is I do want to invite everyone to come visit the museum. We're here at 4th and Flanders in Old Town, or what we're hoping to rename New Japantown, New Chinatown, was known as Nihon Machi, which just means Japantown. So prior to, in 1940, before World War II, there were over 300 Japanese American run businesses, hotels, services, professionals, grocery stores. It was a thriving community, right? So then the incarceration happened, the executive order, which displaced our community. After people were released after the end of World War II, many did not come back to their homes. They couldn't. They went east. They went to different parts of the country. About 900 Japanese Americans resettled back in the Portland area, and they were in Vanport because that was one of the few places, due to the level of prejudice and hatred and fear at that time, where they were able to settle. Then came the Vanport flood, which again was a second displacement and disruption to that community. The other thing I want to let everybody know about is that the Expo Center, which was known as the Portland Assembly Center, a livestock pavilion, prior to World War II, was the place that 3,600 Japanese American women, men, children, elders were locked up for 4.5 months 80 years ago, right now, in a very, very hot Portland summer, under conditions that were hastily reconditioned animal stalls, before most of them were shipped to incarceration camps. Most of them went to Minidoka, Idaho, which has an interpretation center now. So this area of the floodplain has very deep significance, has deep wounds for us, and for our community. It's really important that we develop a site of interpretation and not just a plaque, because this is a place where a thriving community. And I also mentioned another thing that most people don't realize. So prior to World War II, Japanese growers in orchards, in fruit, vegetables, produced over 60% of the produce in Oregon. Think about that. We think of Oregon as this amazing fecund land that produces all kinds of wonderful, this is before the wine industry was here, but 60% of the hands that made that produce were Japanese American. That obviously changed very drastically after the war, though there are still Japanese American farms in Hood River and all around the country. And so one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time is trying to revisit and share that history, different farming methods, to have a demonstration plot of land where we can do that work and share that with Oregon food banks doing that as well. So, and we're looking to partner with Kim. I know I've heard a little bit about the work you're doing with the Black History Museum, which I think is a wonderful idea. So I want to present back to the group today an opportunity, which is that we can be a leader. There's very few metropolitan areas that are willing to take the chance and the opportunity to revisit these painful histories and these legacies, and to create spaces of healing, spaces of education, and spaces of future possibility for those most affected. So that's really what we're interested in seeing, and we will work hard to make that work. And we don't want to necessarily just have it be about Japanese Americans, because certainly there are other groups that were affected, but we have a deep history in these spaces. And so for us, it's important to memorialize that, to educate the public, and to make sure that these mistakes don't happen again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I know we want to have a discussion in breakout groups, but I am also wondering if any of the board members want to ask questions of myself or Cascadia Partners or our guest speakers. So yeah, looking for direction if we should reserve some time for questions or move on to discussion. Yeah, Steve.
Thank you, Aster. I was, before I turn it over to folks to answer that question, I just say, I thought that was an excellent presentation. So thank you, yourself, Irene, Lydia, and really thank you, Paul, Mark, and Kim for being here and sharing. This has been extremely valuable, I know for me, but I'm sure the entire board, and really trying to start to ascertain kind of what direction this should go for the board for this district. But to me, what you presented and the partnerships with communities that have cultural connection to the floodplain makes all the sense in the world. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for us as a government organization to try to directly take on some of this work, but partnering to make the work happen with organizations that already know and already have experiences with this work just makes all the sense in the world to me. I don't know that we're not gonna have time, I think, for breakout sessions. I'm kind of thinking maybe there's about 25 minutes for a little bit of board discussion and questions, maybe as a group, but I don't know that we have time to necessarily break out into smaller groups and then come back. So that would be my suggestion. Does that make sense, Aster?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you all, everyone, for being here. Kim, Paul, Mark, thank you so much for sharing with us your ideas and expressing support for this opportunity.
So let's open it up for discussion and questions. And I saw Mary Helen and then Eric.
I want to say the same thing. I've had the benefit and honor to work with and talk with Kim and Paul, and I've never Mark, but your enthusiasm and support and knowledge is great. With the Vanport Place Marking Project, we're putting wooden signs in the ground just so that people that go to that site get information. But I have always wanted to do something in a cultural history center. And I know Kim and Oregon Black Pioneers are talking with Metro. And so my suggestion, because of their work and connections, and that we support every effort we can to have a cultural history center as part of their redevelopment, because it will be a space where a number of wide demographic people will go and be exposed to the history, and they don't have to walk 5 miles around the site at the where Vanport was, and they aren't limited by events. And so I looked in the chat and saw that the questions and say concerns and comments. And so my comments are, rather than we create a grant issuing RFP process, staff time, etc., that we use whatever money is allocated to support the efforts for a cultural history center. And it seems like to me, in my 3 years of dealing with how do we recognize that, we were going to build an interpretive center, and but it became difficult because of permits and then cost of construction. But this is a process that's already in place with Metro and staff, and it would give us all the more money, as opposed, and no offense to Aster and Evan, but they would be burdened with probably carrying out, or other staff, or contracting for a process to hand the money out. And when there's a way to benefit that process when it's in place, I think that we should support that. So thank you for all your work, because we've benefited greatly in our signage as we're doing now, and look forward to working further on that. But a cultural history center is something that many groups, as we just heard from 3 different ones, are very interested in, and we can support their work by using funds that we allocate.
Thank you, Mary Helen. Before we jump to Eric, I just maybe want to say something really quickly that I want to make sure we don't dive into a discussion about where we would spend the money, because that's not going to be up to us. I think it's, and I know we have a chicken and egg problem as far as this goes. This is really a discussion to inform the revenue generation that we have to figure out as a board. But I'd really make sure we don't get into a discussion around this group or that group, or how we would spend the money or allocate the money. I think we just need to get a sense of, from this discussion, what's our magnitude that we're talking about, and how would we go about then raising that revenue structure to feed into this work. And I know it's a chicken and egg. So you want to know what you're spending the money on to know how much you're spending. I just don't want to, I want to make sure we don't kind of get sidetracked with that. Eric?
Sorry about that. I just didn't explain it well. It's just that money can be well spent on a cultural center, and we need to support the work of whoever gets the money. But my intent was not to pick anybody, but just say that our whole equity plan is to provide cultural history, and this would be a way to do it.
Thanks, Randall. Eric?
Yes, thank you. Really quick question to Cascadia Partners. Beginning in the 18th century, the Hudson Bay Company would bring Pacific Islanders from Hawaii to Vancouver, Washington, to the fort there as indentured service. Was there a reason that they were excluded from the conversations that you had?
No, and we weren't aware of that history. So again, we're learning about this history as we're doing these interviews. So that's certainly, we have a whole list of stakeholders that we've been collecting into a database. So if there are folks that we should be including, or that, you know, we should be having within this list of stakeholders for future engagement, we certainly would love to hear that. If there are specific contacts or folks that we could talk to. But yeah, no other reason other than that we had very short amount of time to interview as many people as we could. But we certainly would love to talk to the Pacific Islanders and other cultural specific populations as well.
I think that that's going to be very important because they're part of the forgotten element of history here. And the only memorialization of their years of indentured servitude come from Fort Vancouver in Vancouver, Washington. And so this is one of the areas in which you can leverage the work that's already been done by the National Park Service and others to gain an understanding. I'd also encourage you to interview people that currently live here, whether primarily through neighborhood associations, because those are the people that really have the best understanding of place and how all of these elements come together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. Nancy?
Hi, yeah, I was struck by the being able to ask, what is it that will a bunch of communities, and what you're bringing forward is what they thought would be useful for this work. And I just want to recognize that, because I work for a utility, environmental services, we provide sewer service, and we are struggling with how to balance exactly what we need to provide with also listening to the community, especially those that don't want to talk to us. So I just want to appreciate hearing the way that you elevated those voices.
Thank you, Nancy. Shirley?
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I really appreciate the speakers that you invited in. I think they're not here now, am I correct? I don't see them. It was really interesting to hear their stories, and I really.
We're all still here, Shirley.
Oh, okay, there's your fault. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for staying around. So one thing that's been going through my mind as we're talking about this is, what are we trying to accomplish with cultural history? And obviously, number one is learn. And, that's why we have had our guest speakers here today, is to begin to learn a little bit more about our culture and what's important about this area that this levy system follows. And so, that was answering one of my questions. I appreciate the suggestion that was made in the presentation that we work with other organizations, community groups, I'll say tribes, and don't refer to them as community groups, then other nations, to bring this information together and under one umbrella. That includes working with other agencies in the region. That, and of course, Mary Helen mentions some of the work that Metro is doing, Multnomah County, of course, the cities. There's just such a wealth of information that we have to learn, and then begin to think about how we're going to honor and value that history. So I first of all appreciate that this is not something that this organization can take on by itself. It's going to have to be partnerships with all these other agencies and nations and community organizations and nonprofit organizations. And then I kind of see a roundtable coming out of this of some sort. We work together on these common goals. And then over time, that will then help us distill the information that's out there, and how do we begin to honor it, value it, and make sure the public is informed about it. But that process alone, though, is a tool, an avenue, a mode of helping the region become more informed of what this district is all about, and the reason why it exists. So I see it as a back and forth between us, this agency, learning about what is the cultural history of this region, of this area, of this district, but also then what is they learn about what this agency's goal and role is. And so I think it can really develop a wonderful partnership. So I hope there will be effort to bring all of these different groups, nations, organizations, community groups together to begin to work on this as one group and not a bunch of independent different agencies going different directions. And I think over time, then that'll really help us see what is most important and what we want to begin to, how we will use this cultural history as a benefit, not only for this agency, but for the greater region.
Thank you, Counselor. Bob?
Yeah, I appreciate Mary Helen's comment, and also appreciate the caution not to be selecting projects right now. One thing I would say, though, is as we get toward the bond and framing that up, I think we can take a lesson from Metro. And part of the strength of that, especially around these kinds of issues, was that they did have projects or specific projects that they could actually identify when they went out to the voters that, we're going to, these are priority projects or priority areas. And a lot of the money was also left undetermined. But I think we should be thinking towards that. And each one of these presentations is really an opportunity to start to explore, are there specific things that we want to elevate that we can roll out as specific examples so the voters can see kind of the stuff that their money would go toward. Without that specificity, it's much harder to convince folks. So, and I just thought today was a really good example of the kinds of things that we should be thinking towards as, perhaps, front-loaded priorities.
Great comments, Bob. Thank you. I know for me, it really helped. It's an impossible question to ask folks right now. Like, what is this from this district's perspective? What is the cost of our contribution into these areas? It's impossible to answer that right now, but it helped me start to get my arms wrapped around kind of what that level of effort may be and how we may, as an entity down the road, accomplish really what the intent is. Bob, go ahead. Did you still have your hand up, Bob, or did I just not catch that?
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I'm done.
Okay. Other questions, comments? We have about 10 minutes. You've stunned them into oh, Councilor Craddock. Oh, you're on mute, Councilor.
Pardon me, thank you. Regarding one other comment I wanted to make is I don't see this agency being able to do a lot of funding. They're actually going to have funding available. There might, I guess, as this group begins to think about when you approach the voters to for the bond, do you want to set money aside for the future for this kind of work? And I assume you might after some of the research that you're doing. But I would also think that this agency would be looking at opportunities to apply for funding and for focusing on our cultural history, and that in particular working with these partners again that I was mentioning earlier to go and share a funding source, work on a funding source together to be able to accomplish a specific action or goal that we have in common. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Thanks, Councilor. Mary Helen.
I just wanted to say I totally agree with Bob about putting this on the bond measure so that people know what they're voting for, because that gives them a specific. And I will tell you, being able to find someone, and I'm going to say someone, but some group, an entity that can coordinate all these different efforts into what they would do to memorialize cultural history in a building or a presentation or a museum. I think that Oregon Black Pioneers is working on the museum for Black in the state of Oregon, and Mark represents a museum and Paul has Native Americans, but there's other groups like Eric mentioned. And in my 3 years of this Vanport Place Marking Project, there's a whole lot of people with a whole lot of ideas. And I was supposed to be retired 4 years ago, and I haven't been able to yet. And I'm almost working harder in my retirement. But it's because there's so much passion and talent out there. So I think consideration for how this would be done, and Councilor Craddock saying that contributing to a fund because it'll take more money than we have. And I think that it's imperative that we do something, but what that something is probably further down the line of discussion, and but it will also be a good, I'm going to say, selling or positive point in, not that there's a negative point in the bond, but it will give them something to be able to tie cultural history to flood safety, because those are two important things and people don't often make the connection. And admittedly, I didn't 3 years ago, but now I do. And so I think that's important to be able to present when we do that, because it's a good feeling for everybody. I haven't found anybody that doesn't think cultural history is a bad thing. So.
Thanks, Mary Helen. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but just remind folks that the bond, if you go out with a capital bond, you can't pay for operational items with that. It's for capital projects, but there are other revenue sources you can go to the voters for that deal with operational programs and ongoing costs and utility rate. We're talking about rates and everything else. So it definitely a good comment that including more specificity in what the like a geo bond, capital bond would include, and if there are any elements that are capital construction kind of related things that can help with that, then that's a good thing. Eric?
Yeah, I would like my fellow board members just to begin to think about what should be the goals for this program and to start to enumerate those things that we would like to see, how we would measure that, how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for that, and to be able to bring that to the next discussion that we have with this group.
Thank you, Eric. Evan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you, Steve, for bringing up the operational versus capital sort of distinction. And staff is working towards bringing you proposals on both, sort of operational first. So we're thinking about what could be possible with operational dollars, recognizing that there are very clear asks that we've heard from the community that make sense for a geo bond that can be part of the conversation as we come. So just to distinguish for you all as we come forward in the next few months to talk about the operating revenue structure, we're really going to be looking at sort of programmatic annual contributions and what we're thinking about from that stage, with the hope that there will be space in the capital bond, in the bond measure for capital investments as well.
Thanks, Evan. We've got about 5 minutes if you have a thought you want to share with the group. Not seeing anything right now. Raise your hand if you do.
I just want to clarify the Oregon Black Pioneers position, because we're still sharing this idea with our executive committee and our board, and so it's not a final decision as you know how that works in the nonprofit world. But as we explore, several properties for a standalone African American museum, we are kind of moving away from the Expo Center because we feel that the exhibit hall should really honor the Japanese history, and also we feel that the Expo site is really a great place to honor Vanport. And although Vanport has multicultural history, because they have multicultural history, we want to be a part of that. But we wouldn't want we want to honor the spaces for the history that, that's relevant to those sites, but while seeking a standalone museum. And we just don't feel that connection to that land. We think other groups are more connected, but because of the multi-ethnic history of the Vanport, we would love to be part of that interpretation with the coalition, with the group. But so I just wanted to clarify that as well. And we'll be making some final decisions in September, at the end of September.
Thank you, Kimberly. Paul?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to make a short presentation today, and NAEA stands in support of this effort, and feel free to reach out if we can help in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments, questions? This has been a great discussion, great sharing of information. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to call the September 19th meeting of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District officially closed. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Somebody tell Jim we ended early without him.
Thank you, everybody.
Twice in a row, all notes.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.